The moment I realized my son had chosen his wife over his dying father wasn't when Marcus burst into the hospice room with legal documents clutched in his trembling hands. It wasn't during the 3 months of David's pancreatic cancer battle, watching our boy visit less and less while making excuses about Sophia's emotional needs during this difficult time. No, it was when I saw the divorce papers scattered across David's hospital bed like fallen leaves, and heard Marcus declare that if his father didn't sign them immediately, he'd contest the will and make sure I got nothing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Catherine Walsh, and for 38 years, I believed I knew my son. I believed that somewhere beneath the expensive suits and calculated smiles lived the little boy who used to crawl into our bed during thunderstorms, seeking comfort between his father and me. I believed that blood meant something, that family bonds could weather any storm. I was wrong about so many things, but I was right about one crucial detail. David had indeed prepared for this moment, and what I brought to that hospital room would change everything. The story begins 6 months earlier, on a crisp October morning in Portland, Oregon, when David first felt the pain that would eventually steal him from me. He was 59 then, a successful architect who had built our construction firm from a single truck and a dream into one of the Pacific Northwest's most respected companies. Walsh Associates had weathered recessions, boom cycles, and countless challenges because David never compromised on quality or integrity. Those same principles guided how he raised Marcus, or at least how he tried to. Marcus was 28 when he married Sophia Brennan, a stunning brunette with expensive tastes and ambitious social climbing tendencies. From the beginning, she made it clear that David and I didn't fit into her vision of sophistication. Our modest home in Southeast Portland wasn't prestigious enough for entertaining her friends. Our casual family dinners conflicted with her preferred restaurant scene. Most painfully, our close-knit family traditions felt suffocating to someone who viewed relationships as strategic networking opportunities. David tried to welcome Sophia warmly, as he welcomed everyone who mattered to Marcus. He offered her a position in our company's marketing department, hoping work might help her understand our family's values. She accepted but quickly grew frustrated with the collaborative atmosphere David fostered among employees. She wanted hierarchy, status symbols, clear delineation between management and workers. When David gently suggested she spend time learning different aspects of the business, she complained to Marcus that his father was being condescending and micromanaging her career. The first major rift came during their second year of marriage when Sophia demanded that Marcus ask David to co-sign a loan for a downtown condo she'd selected. The monthly payments alone exceeded Marcus's salary, even with his generous compensation as project manager. David sat down with them both, explaining that while he supported their desire for a home, taking on debt they couldn't service independently would create unnecessary stress and dependency. Sophia's reaction was swift and cutting. She accused David of trying to control their lives, of being threatened by her ambition, of keeping Marcus under his thumb to maintain power. The words stung because they were so far from David's actual motivations. He wanted Marcus to succeed independently, to build confidence through his own accomplishments rather than relying on family wealth. But Sophia framed every boundary as manipulation, every piece of advice as interference. Marcus found himself caught between his wife's escalating demands and his father's disappointed concern. Rather than addressing the underlying issues, he chose the path of least resistance, gradually distancing himself from family events and business discussions. Sunday dinners became monthly obligations. Holiday celebrations were rushed affairs where Sophia checked her phone constantly and made pointed comments about having other commitments. The easy communication David and Marcus had always shared became stilted and formal. The cancer diagnosis arrived like a thunderbolt on an ordinary Tuesday morning. David had been experiencing persistent abdominal pain for weeks, attributing it to stress and long work hours. When the imaging results came back showing a mass on his pancreas, the oncologist's grave expression told us everything before he spoke a single word. Stage 3 pancreatic adenocarcinoma. Aggressive treatment might buy time, but the statistics were unforgiving. I called Marcus immediately, my voice shaking as I tried to explain what the doctors had told us. His initial response was exactly what I'd hoped for. He would clear his calendar, drive straight to the hospital, be there for whatever we needed. For a brief moment, I felt the relief of knowing our family would face this crisis together. Then Sophia's voice cut through the background, sharp and agitated. She was reminding Marcus about their weekend plans, their dinner reservations, their commitment to her sister's engagement party. Marcus arrived at the hospital 2 hours later, looking harried and conflicted. He hugged David awkwardly, asked the appropriate questions about treatment options and prognosis, then began glancing at his watch. Sophia waited in the car, he explained, because hospitals made her anxious. They couldn't stay long because they had obligations, but of course they would make time for family during this difficult period. David handled Marcus's discomfort with characteristic grace, assuring him that we understood everyone needed to process the news differently. But I saw the flicker of hurt in my husband's eyes when Marcus promised to call tomorrow instead of staying to discuss treatment plans. I saw David's hand tremble slightly as he watched our son rush away to rejoin his wife and their social calendar. The treatment phase revealed the true depth of our family's fractures. David endured chemotherapy with remarkable courage, even as the side effects ravaged his body. I took leave from my part-time teaching position to become his full-time caregiver, managing medications, driving to appointments, and trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy in our disrupted lives. Our closest friends rallied around us, bringing meals, offering respite care, and providing the emotional support that sustains people through medical crises. Marcus visited sporadically, usually alone, explaining that Sophia found cancer treatment too distressing to witness. His visits followed a predictable pattern. He would arrive looking guilty and overwhelmed, spend 30 minutes making awkward conversation about work or weather, then fabricate an urgent reason to leave. Sometimes he brought flowers, expensive arrangements that looked beautiful but felt impersonal. Sometimes he brought takeout from restaurants David could no longer tolerate due to his compromised digestive system. The most painful visits were when Marcus tried to discuss business matters, clearly prompted by Sophia's questions about inheritance and company succession. David had spent years grooming Marcus to eventually take over Walsh Associates, but those conversations had always focused on developing leadership skills and understanding operational complexities. Now Marcus asked about financial projections, asset valuations, and ownership transfer timelines. The questions revealed how little he actually understood about the business beyond its potential monetary value. David's condition deteriorated rapidly after the new year. The chemotherapy had bought us precious months together, but the cancer proved more aggressive than anyone hoped. By February, we transitioned to hospice care, focusing on comfort and quality time, rather than futile medical interventions. David faced his mortality with the same steady determination he'd brought to every challenge in his life, but I could see him struggling with unfinished emotional business, particularly regarding Marcus. During one of our quiet evening conversations, David confided his deepest fears about our son's future. He worried that Marcus had lost touch with the values they'd once shared, that Sophia's influence was pulling him toward a superficial lifestyle, focused on status and material accumulation. More troubling, David suspected that Marcus viewed his inheritance as a solution to financial pressures, rather than a responsibility to continue meaningful work. These concerns led David to make a decision that would ultimately define our family's future. Working with his longtime attorney, James Rodriguez, David restructured his will to include specific provisions designed to protect both the business and Marcus from potentially destructive choices. The new arrangement required Marcus to demonstrate genuine commitment to the company's values and employees before gaining full control. It also included safeguards to prevent the business from being sold or dismantled for quick profit. David didn't tell Marcus about these changes directly, hoping that their son would prove his concerns unfounded through actions rather than words. He wanted to believe that facing his father's death would inspire Marcus to reconsider his priorities and recommit to their shared values. Unfortunately, the opposite occurred. As David's condition worsened, Marcus's visits became even more infrequent. Sophia had apparently decided that prolonged exposure to illness was unhealthy for their relationship, and she began scheduling conflicts that prevented Marcus from spending meaningful time with his dying father. A weekend spa retreat coincided with David's birthday. A work conference that Sophia insisted Marcus attend fell during the week when doctors predicted David might have only days remaining. The breaking point came on a gray March morning when David was clearly approaching his final days. His breathing had become labored, his consciousness intermittent, and the hospice nurses prepared me for the reality that we were measuring time in hours rather than weeks. I called Marcus, pleading with him to come immediately if he wanted to say goodbye to his father. His response shattered whatever remained of my maternal illusions about his character. Sophia had retained a divorce attorney, Marcus explained in a strained voice. They'd been having marital problems that I apparently didn't understand, and the lawyer advised them that David's impending death created urgent legal complications. If Marcus inherited significant assets while married to Sophia, she would have claims on everything in the event of their divorce. The only solution was for David to sign papers immediately, transferring ownership of the house and business to Marcus before the marriage was legally dissolved. I listened in stunned silence as Marcus laid out this plan with the mechanical precision of someone reciting instructions. Sophia's attorney had prepared all the necessary documents. Marcus would bring them to the hospice that afternoon. David would sign everything while he was still legally competent, ensuring a clean transfer of assets. Then Marcus and Sophia could proceed with their divorce without any financial complications. It was practical, efficient, and absolutely necessary for protecting the family's interests. The audacity of this scheme left me temporarily speechless. My husband was dying, and our son was planning to use those final precious hours to conduct legal business designed to facilitate his divorce. The conversation revealed how completely Marcus had lost sight of what mattered, how thoroughly Sophia had convinced him that financial maneuvering took precedence over human connection and final goodbyes. When I tried to explain that David needed emotional support, not legal documents, Marcus became defensive and irritated. Time was a factor, he insisted. Sophia's attorney had explained that delays could create complications. David would want to protect the family's financial interests, wouldn't he? This was about securing Marcus's future, ensuring that years of hard work weren't lost to divorce proceedings. I ended the call without agreeing to anything, my hands shaking with a combination of grief and rage. David was sleeping fitfully, his breathing shallow but steady. In a few hours, Marcus would arrive with papers that would reduce his father's final day to a business transaction. Unless I found a way to stop it, that's when I remembered David's safe, hidden behind a false panel in our bedroom closet. Years earlier, during a previous health scare, David had given me the combination and explained that certain documents were stored there for emergencies. I'd never accessed it before, trusting David to handle all financial and legal matters. But these weren't normal circumstances, and desperation drove me to explore every option. Inside the safe, beneath insurance policies and property deeds, I found a sealed envelope marked for Catherine. Final instructions. My heart pounded as I broke the seal and read David's handwritten letter, dated just 6 weeks earlier when he was still mobile and clear-minded.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
My dearest Catherine, the letter began. If you're reading this, then I'm likely gone or very close to going, and Marcus has probably revealed his true priorities in ways that have broken your heart. I've seen the changes in our son over the past few years, and I've prepared for the possibility that grief and outside influence might drive him to make choices that dishonor everything we've built together. The letter continued with David's characteristic thoughtfulness and foresight. He'd anticipated that Sophia might pressure Marcus into treating his inheritance as a financial asset rather than a moral responsibility. To prevent this, David had created what he called the real will, a document that bypassed the standard probate process and implemented immediate protections for both the business and our family's legacy. Under the terms David had established, Marcus would inherit only a modest trust fund and his current position in the company, with the possibility of earning greater responsibility over time through demonstrated commitment to the business's values and employees. The house would remain mine for life, with ownership transferring to local charities after my death. Most significantly, Walsh Associates would be restructured as an employee-owned cooperative, ensuring its survival regardless of Marcus's future choices. David had also prepared video messages explaining his reasoning, recorded during his clearer moments over the past month. These recordings addressed Marcus directly, expressing David's love while clearly outlining his disappointment in the choices our son had made. They were intended to be played after David's death, giving Marcus one final opportunity to hear his father's hopes for his redemption and growth. But the most powerful element David had prepared wasn't legal or financial. It was a collection of letters and photographs documenting Marcus's childhood and young adulthood, back when his character seemed aligned with our family's values. David had written detailed memories of proud moments, times when Marcus showed integrity, compassion, and genuine care for others. These letters were meant to remind our son of who he used to be, and who he could still become if he chose differently. Reading David's final instructions, I felt a complex mixture of heartbreak and admiration. Even while facing his own mortality, my husband had been working to protect everyone he loved, including the son who was currently treating him as an obstacle to financial security. David understood that true inheritance wasn't about money or property, but about values, character, and the courage to live meaningfully. As I finished reading, I heard voices in the hallway outside David's room. Marcus had arrived, and he wasn't alone. Sophia's voice carried clearly through the thin walls, sharp and insistent as she reminded Marcus about the importance of getting everything signed quickly. They'd brought a notary, she was saying, to ensure legal validity. David's condition made timing critical. I carefully returned David's letter to the envelope, my mind racing through the implications of what I'd discovered. In a few minutes, Marcus would enter his father's room with divorce papers and transfer documents, expecting a dying man to facilitate his son's abandonment of everything David had spent his life building. Marcus had no idea that David had already anticipated this moment and prepared accordingly. Taking a deep breath, I tucked the envelope into my purse and walked back toward David's room. My husband's eyes were open now, watching the doorway with a mixture of hope and resignation. He knew Marcus was coming, and despite everything, part of him still hoped for a different conversation than the one that was about to unfold. Marcus appeared in the doorway, dressed in an expensive suit that Sophia had probably selected for its authoritative appearance. He carried a leather briefcase and wore the determined expression of someone executing an unpleasant but necessary task. Behind him, Sophia hovered with predatory anticipation, her designer outfit and perfect makeup grotesquely inappropriate for a hospice setting. What happened next would determine not just the legal distribution of David's estate, but the final chapter of our family's story. Marcus had chosen to make his father's deathbed into a business meeting. But David had prepared something far more powerful than legal documents, and I was about to discover whether love and wisdom could triumph over greed and manipulation. The confrontation that followed would test everything I believed about family, forgiveness, and the true meaning of inheritance. In the next few hours, Marcus would learn that his father's greatest gift wasn't money or property, but the opportunity to examine his choices and reclaim his character. Whether he accepted that gift would determine not just his financial future, but his soul. As Marcus stepped into the room with his briefcase full of papers, I reached into my purse and touched David's envelope. My husband had given me the tools to protect his legacy and offer our son one last chance at redemption. Now I had to find the courage to use them, even if it meant watching Marcus walk away from everything David had hoped to leave him. The battle for our family's future was about to begin, and the most important inheritance of all hung in the balance. Marcus entered the room with the measured stride of someone who had rehearsed this moment. The leather briefcase in his hand seemed to weigh more than its contents should, and I noticed how he avoided looking directly at David's face. Instead, his eyes focused on the medical equipment, the IV stand, anything that allowed him to maintain emotional distance from the reality of his father's condition. "Hello, Dad," he said, his voice artificially bright in the way people use when they're trying to convince themselves that everything is normal. "You're looking better today." David's eyes, though clouded with medication, still held their characteristic sharpness. He studied Marcus for a long moment before speaking, his voice barely above a whisper but perfectly clear. "Am I?" Sophia remained in the doorway, her presence like a cold draft that made the already sterile room feel even more unwelcoming. She wore a black dress that probably cost more than most people spent on rent, paired with pearl earrings that caught the fluorescent lighting with each impatient movement of her head. Her expression conveyed barely concealed irritation at being in this place, among these circumstances, dealing with what she clearly viewed as an inconvenient delay in her carefully orchestrated plans. Marcus set his briefcase on the small table beside David's bed, the metallic click echoing in the quiet room. Dad, I need to discuss something important with you, something that can't wait. David's gaze shifted to me, a silent question in his eyes. I moved closer to his bedside, my hand finding his under the thin hospital blanket. His fingers were cold but his grip was firm, and I felt some of his strength transfer to me through that simple contact. "What is it, son?" David asked, though I suspected he already knew. My husband had always been perceptive about people's motivations, and Marcus's behavior over the past weeks had been increasingly transparent. Marcus opened his briefcase with practiced efficiency, removing a stack of legal documents that had clearly been prepared by expensive attorneys. The papers were bound with blue backing, official seals visible on every page, the kind of documentation that transforms human relationships into legal transactions. "Sophia and I have been having some difficulties in our marriage," Marcus began, his tone suggesting he was reading from a script. "We've decided that separation is the best option for both of us, but there are financial complications that need to be resolved before we can proceed." David's breathing remained steady, but I felt his hand tighten slightly around mine. "Financial complications." The attorney explained that if I inherit assets while still married to Sophia, she could have claims on everything in the event of a divorce. Marcus spoke rapidly now, as if speed would somehow make his request less shocking. "The solution is to transfer ownership of the house and the business to me immediately, before the marriage is legally dissolved. That way, everything remains protected within the family." Sophia stepped forward from the doorway, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor. "Marcus, tell him about the timeline. Time is a factor here." Marcus glanced at his wife, then back at David. "We need to finalize these transfers today, Dad. The divorce papers have already been filed, and Sophia's attorney says any delay could create legal complications that might take years to resolve." I watched David absorb this information, saw him process not just the legal implications but the emotional reality of what Marcus was asking. His son had come to his deathbed not to offer comfort or seek forgiveness, not to share memories or express love, but to conduct a business transaction designed to facilitate the dissolution of his marriage. "You want me to sign papers transferring my life's work to you," David said slowly, "so that you can divorce your wife without financial consequences." "It's about protecting the family's interests," Marcus replied defensively. "You've always said that family comes first. This is just ensuring that what you've built stays in the family." David's laugh was bitter and brief. "And where exactly does your family begin and end, Marcus?" The question hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, his prepared responses suddenly inadequate for the complexity of what his father was asking. Sophia moved closer to the bed, her voice taking on the honey-sweet tone she used when trying to manipulate situations to her advantage. "Mr. Walsh, I know this seems sudden, but we're just trying to be practical." David always taught Marcus to think ahead, to plan for contingencies. This is exactly the kind of forward thinking he learned from you. I felt nauseated by her attempt to frame this betrayal as a tribute to David's wisdom. My husband had indeed taught Marcus to think ahead, but he'd also taught him about loyalty, integrity, and the difference between protecting family and exploiting it. Somehow those lessons had been lost in the translation. David studied Sophia with the same analytical gaze he'd once used to evaluate construction sites and business proposals. "And what happens to Catherine in your practical plan?" Marcus looked genuinely surprised by the question, as if he hadn't considered my position in any of this beyond signing whatever papers were put in front of me. "Mom will be taken care of course. She'll have the house, and I'll make sure she's financially secure." "Until you decide she won't be," David replied quietly. "Until circumstances change and practical considerations require different arrangements." "That's not fair, Dad. I would never, wouldn't you?" David's voice grew stronger, fueled by a clarity that sometimes emerges in people facing their final moments. 3 months ago, you promised to help with my treatment schedule. You canceled because Sophia had tickets to a wine tasting. 6 weeks ago, you committed to handling the Henderson project review while I was in treatment. You delegated it to an intern because you and Sophia were house hunting in Lake Oswego. Each example hit Marcus like a physical blow, his face flushing as David methodically catalogued his failures. I realized that my husband had been keeping track, noting each broken promise and missed commitment, building a case against our son's reliability even as he hoped for evidence of his character. Those were different situations. Marcus protested weakly. This is about major financial decisions, not scheduling conflicts. Character isn't situational, son. David's words carried the weight of 38 years of fatherhood, of lessons taught and opportunities given. It's what you do when no one is watching, how you treat people when it's inconvenient, whether you keep your word when keeping it costs you something. Sophia's mask of patience finally slipped, revealing the calculating ambition beneath. This is exactly the kind of emotional manipulation we were warned about. Mr. Walsh, your son is trying to protect assets that took him years to help build. He deserves security after everything he's invested in this company. I watched David turn his full attention to Sophia for the first time, studying her with the intensity he'd once reserved for architectural blueprints that didn't quite add up. What exactly did Marcus invest, Sophia? What did he sacrifice to help build Walsh Associates? He gave up other opportunities, she replied quickly. He could have worked anywhere, made his own fortune instead of being dependent on family business. Could he? David asked. Or did he choose the path of least resistance, accepting a position and salary he hadn't earned through the same family connections he's now asking me to protect him from? The truth of David's observation was evident in Marcus's expression. Our son had never seriously considered working elsewhere, never tested his abilities in an environment where his last name didn't open doors and smooth paths. His entire professional identity was built on the foundation of David's reputation and connections. Marcus pulled out a chair and sat down heavily, the briefcase still open before him like an accusation. Dad, please. I know I haven't been perfect, but I'm trying to do the right thing here. Sophia and we're not working out, but that doesn't mean I don't deserve my inheritance. Your inheritance. David repeated the words slowly, as if tasting something bitter. Tell me, Marcus, what do you think you're inheriting? The business, the house, the assets you've built over 30 years. Marcus gestured toward the papers in his briefcase. Everything you've worked for. David was quiet for a long moment, his breathing shallow but steady. When he spoke again, his voice carried a sadness that broke my heart. I built a company based on integrity, where employees were treated as family and clients trusted us to do honest work. I built a home where love mattered more than status, where character was valued over convenience. I built relationships with people who showed up when times were difficult, who honored their commitments even when it cost them something. He paused, his eyes moving between Marcus and Sophia. Which of those things do you think you're inheriting, son? Marcus stared at his father, confusion and frustration warring in his expression. I'm inheriting the business, Dad. The financial assets, the client contracts, the property holdings. That's what inheritance means. No, David said firmly. That's what you want it to mean. But inheritance is what gets passed down from one generation to the next. Values, character, wisdom, integrity. The money and property are just tools for continuing that legacy. Sophia stepped forward again, her patience clearly exhausted. This is all very philosophical, but we have legal documents that need to be signed. Marcus deserves protection from the financial consequences of our divorce, and time is running out to ensure that protection. I felt David's hand squeeze mine, a signal I recognized from decades of marriage. He was telling me that the moment had arrived, that it was time to reveal what he had prepared for this confrontation. Actually, I said, speaking for the first time since Marcus had entered the room, I think there's something you both need to understand about David's intentions for his estate. Marcus looked at me with surprise, as if he'd forgotten I was present during this conversation about dismantling the life David and I had built together. Mom, this is between Dad and me. These are business decisions. No, Marcus, I replied calmly. These are family decisions, and I'm still part of this family, even if you seem to have forgotten that. I reached into my purse and withdrew David's envelope, the one marked with instructions for this exact scenario. Both Marcus and Sophia watched with growing alarm as I broke the seal and removed the documents inside. Your father anticipated this conversation, I continued, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me. He prepared for the possibility that grief and outside influence might drive you to treat his death as a business opportunity rather than a human loss. David's eyes met mine, and I saw approval there along with love and gratitude for my willingness to carry out his final wishes. He'd known this moment would be difficult for me, that standing up to Marcus would require more strength than I'd ever needed to find before. "What is that?" Sophia demanded, her voice sharp with suspicion. "David's real will," I replied simply. "The one that reflects his actual intentions for his estate, based on careful observation of Marcus's character and choices over the past several years." Marcus leaned forward, his face pale. "What do you mean, his real will?" "I've seen Dad's will. James Rodriguez walked me through the basic provisions months ago." "You've seen the preliminary will," I corrected. "The one David hoped he'd never need to replace. But as your behavior made clear that you viewed his illness as an inconvenience, and his death as a payday, he made other arrangements." I handed Marcus the first document from David's envelope, watching his expression change as he read the opening paragraphs. The new will was comprehensive and unambiguous, reflecting David's deep disappointment in the man our son had become while leaving room for his eventual redemption. Under the terms David had established, Marcus would inherit a modest trust fund sufficient to maintain a comfortable lifestyle but nowhere near enough to support Sophia's expensive tastes or social ambitions. The house would remain mine for life, with ownership transferring to local charities focused on affordable housing after my death. Most significantly, Walsh Associates would be restructured as an employee-owned cooperative, ensuring its survival and values regardless of Marcus's future choices. "This can't be legal," Marcus said, his voice rising as he scanned the document. "Dad was on medication, he wasn't thinking clearly. This is elder abuse." David's voice, though weak, carried absolute authority. "I was examined by 3 independent physicians before signing those papers, Marcus. All confirmed my mental competency. James Rodriguez has video documentation of our meetings, along with written statements about my reasoning for these changes." Sophia snatched the papers from Marcus's hands, her eyes widening as she absorbed the financial implications. "This is insane. You're disinheriting your only son over what? Missing a few family dinners, having marriage problems." "I'm protecting my life's work from people who view it as a commodity to be liquidated," David replied. "I'm ensuring that the employees who've been loyal to this company for decades aren't sacrificed for someone else's financial convenience." Marcus stood abruptly, pacing to the window before turning back to face his father. "Dad, please. I know I haven't been perfect, but you can't just throw away 38 years of being your son over some mistakes." "I'm not throwing anything away," David said sadly. "I'm acknowledging what you've already thrown away. The question is whether you're willing to work to earn it back." "Earn it back?" Sophia's voice was incredulous. "He's your son. He shouldn't have to earn his inheritance." David looked at her with something approaching pity. "Everyone has to earn what matters, Sophia. Love, respect, trust, legacy. Being born into a family gives you opportunities, not guarantees." I watched Marcus struggle with the reality of what his father had done, saw him cycling through anger, denial, and desperate calculation as he tried to find some way to reverse or circumvent David's decision. The entitled young man who'd entered the room with divorce papers was being confronted with consequences he'd never imagined possible. "There has to be something we can do," Marcus said finally, looking between the legal documents and his father's face. "Some way to fix this." "There is," David replied. "But it doesn't involve signing papers or making deals. It involves looking honestly at the choices you've made, and deciding who you want to be going forward." Sophia's face had gone through several color changes as she processed the financial catastrophe that David's new will represented. Her carefully laid plans for a comfortable divorce settlement had just evaporated, replaced by the prospect of being married to a man with limited assets and no business empire to inherit. "This is vindictive," she declared, her composure finally cracking completely. "You're punishing Marcus for falling in love with someone you never liked." "I'm disappointed that he fell in love with someone who taught him to value money over family," David corrected. "But that was his choice to make, just as these consequences are his to face." Marcus slumped back into his chair, the weight of his situation finally registering fully. "Dad, I need that inheritance. Sophia and I have debts, commitments. The Lake Oswego house alone costs more per month than I make in salary, Then perhaps you should reconsider whether you can afford the Lake Oswego house, David suggested gently, or whether the person encouraging you to live beyond your means has your best interests at heart. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Marcus was being forced to confront not just the financial reality of his situation, but the emotional truth about his marriage and his wife's motivations. The woman who'd been pushing him to demand immediate inheritance was unlikely to stand by him through actual financial hardship. "There's more," I said quietly, reaching back into the envelope. "Your father prepared video messages for you, Marcus. Final thoughts he wanted to share, along with some memories from when you were younger." I handed him a flash drive, small and unassuming but containing what David considered his most important legacy. He hoped that seeing yourself through his eyes might help you remember who you used to be. Marcus stared at the drive as if it were a dangerous artifact. "I don't want to watch videos of Dad lecturing me about my failures." "They're not lectures," I assured him. "They're love letters. From a father who never stopped believing his son could choose to be better." Sophia had been unusually quiet during this exchange, but now she moved toward the door with purposeful strides. "Marcus, we need to leave. We need to get to James Rodriguez's office immediately and contest this will. There are grounds for appeal, ways to challenge his competency." Marcus looked at his wife, then at his father, then at the flash drive in his hands. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the boy who used to choose family over convenience, who understood that some things mattered more than money. "Maybe we should watch the videos first," he said hesitantly. "Absolutely not," Sophia snapped. "Every minute we waste here is a minute our attorneys could be working on reversing this travesty." "Marcus, you're not thinking clearly. Grief is clouding your judgment." David watched this exchange with the expression of someone seeing his worst fears confirmed. "She's right about one thing, Marcus. You do need to think clearly. About what kind of man you want to be, what kind of legacy you want to leave, what kind of relationships actually sustain you through difficult times." Marcus stood again, the flash drive clutched in his fist, his face a battlefield of competing loyalties and desires. The next few minutes would determine not just the distribution of David's estate, but the future of our family and the final chapter of his relationship with his father. Sophia waited by the door, her impatience radiating through the small room like heat from a furnace. She'd invested years in positioning herself for this inheritance, and David's last-minute changes threatened everything she'd worked to achieve. Her next words would either pull Marcus back into her web of manipulation or push him toward the painful self-examination his father was offering. "Marcus," she said, her voice taking on the tone of someone delivering an ultimatum, "you need to choose right now, your father or your future, your past or your life with me." The choice she was demanding revealed everything about how she viewed relationships, loyalty, and love. In Sophia's world, caring about his dying father was incompatible with building a life with her. Honoring David's wishes meant betraying their marriage. Marcus couldn't have both family connections and financial security. David's voice, though growing weaker, carried absolute clarity. "Son, the choice isn't between your father and your future. It's between the future you've been promised and the future you could build through your own character and choices." Marcus looked between his wife and his father, holding the flash drive that contained David's final messages. The legal documents scattered across the hospital table represented two very different paths forward. One led through attorneys and appeals and bitter family litigation. The other led through honest self-examination and the possibility of redemption. The decision he made in the next few moments would define not just his inheritance, but his character, his relationships, and ultimately his legacy. As I watched our son struggle with the most important choice of his adult life, I found myself praying that somewhere beneath the entitlement and manipulation, the boy David had raised with such love and hope still existed. The battle for Marcus's soul was about to reach its climax, and none of us knew which side would ultimately prevail. Marcus stood frozen between his wife and his father, the flash drive warm in his palm like a small heart beating with possibility. The silence stretched until the only sounds were David's labored breathing and the distant hum of medical equipment monitoring his failing body. I watched our son's face cycle through emotions I hadn't seen since he was a teenager facing difficult choices, back when right and wrong seemed clearer to him. "I need some air," he said finally, his voice barely audible. I need to think. Sophia's eyes flashed with anger. There's nothing to think about, Marcus. Your father is manipulating you from his deathbed, trying to control your decisions even after he's gone. This is exactly the kind of behavior that damaged your relationship in the first place. Marcus asked, looking at her with an expression I couldn't quite read. Or is this the first time I'm actually listening to what he's been trying to tell me for years? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and I saw Sophia recognize the dangerous territory this conversation was entering. Her carefully constructed narrative about David's controlling behavior was being examined by the person who most needed to believe it, and she was losing ground. Marcus, you're upset, she said, modulating her voice to the soothing tone she used when trying to regain control of situations. Your father is dying, and grief is making you question things that were never really problems. We've been happy together, we've built a good life, have we? Marcus turned to face her fully, and I realized he was asking a genuine question rather than making a rhetorical point. When was the last time you asked how I was feeling about losing Dad? When did you last suggest we spend more time with him during his final weeks? Sophia's mouth opened and closed without producing words, caught off guard by the directness of his questions. She'd become so accustomed to Marcus accepting her version of reality that she wasn't prepared to defend it under scrutiny. David watched this exchange with the intensity of someone witnessing a crucial moment in his son's development. Despite his physical weakness, his eyes remained sharp and focused, taking in every nuance of Marcus's evolving understanding. The last 3 months, Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. Every time I mentioned visiting Dad, or helping with his treatment, you found reasons why it wasn't convenient. You scheduled conflicts, planned trips, created emergencies that required my attention. I was protecting you, Sophia protested. Watching someone die slowly is traumatic. I didn't want you to carry those horrible memories. But they're not horrible memories, Marcus said, and I heard wonder in his voice, as if he was discovering something important. The conversations I've had with Dad during his illness, the quiet moments when we just sat together, those are some of the most meaningful experiences I've ever had. You tried to take that away from me. I felt tears building behind my eyes as I watched my son rediscover truths he'd lost somewhere along the path of his marriage. The boy who used to treasure family time, who found deep satisfaction in working alongside his father, was fighting his way back to the surface. Sophia sensed the shift in Marcus's perspective and changed tactics, her voice taking on the wounded tone she used when other approaches failed. I can't believe you're choosing to hurt me like this. After everything we've been through together, everything I've sacrificed to build our life, what exactly did you sacrifice, Sophia? The question came from David, his voice quiet but penetrating. What did you give up to marry my son? She turned toward him with obvious reluctance, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. I gave up my career in marketing to support Marcus's position in your company. I gave up my independence to become part of your family. David's laugh was bitter and brief. You tried to revolutionize our marketing strategy by suggesting we fire our longest-serving employees to reduce overhead costs. You considered your independence sacrificed when you were asked to participate in family traditions that existed long before you arrived. Marcus stared at his wife, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Is that true? You wanted Dad to fire people who'd been with the company for decades. I wanted him to modernize his business practices. Sophia replied defensively. Loyalty is fine, but profitability matters more. Those older employees were earning higher wages without necessarily producing better results than younger workers we could hire for less money. The calculation in her response revealed everything about her values and priorities. She viewed David's employees as interchangeable resources rather than people with families, histories, and contributions that couldn't be measured solely in productivity metrics. Those older employees taught me everything I know about construction, Marcus said slowly. Jerry Santos showed me how to read blueprints when I was 12 years old. Maria Gonzalez has been our accounting manager for 20 years and knows every aspect of our financial operations. You wanted Dad to fire them to increase profit margins. Sophia's composure was cracking under the weight of having her attitudes examined and questioned. I wanted him to run his business like a business instead of a charity. There's nothing wrong with prioritizing financial success. There's everything wrong with it when financial success comes at the expense of human decency, David said, his voice growing weaker but his conviction remaining strong. A business that treats people as disposable assets isn't worth building or inheriting. Marcus looked down at the flash drive in his hand, then back at his father. What's on here, Dad? What did you want to tell me? David's eyes met mine, and I saw him gathering strength for what might be his final important conversation with our son. Memories of who you used to be, hopes for who you could still become, and an explanation of why I made the choices I made about the business. Don't listen to it, Sophia said urgently. Marcus, whatever's on that drive is designed to manipulate your emotions, to make you feel guilty for having an adult life separate from your parents. This is psychological manipulation at its worst. But Marcus was already moving toward the laptop that sat on the small desk in the corner of David's room. I'd brought it to help pass time during the long hours of his care, never imagining it would become the vehicle for his final attempt to reach our son. Marcus, if you watch those videos, you're choosing your father over our marriage, Sophia declared, her voice sharp with desperation. I won't stay married to someone who lets his family control his decisions from beyond the grave. Marcus paused with his hand on the laptop, the ultimatum hanging between them like a blade. The choice Sophia was demanding revealed the fundamental incompatibility between her vision of marriage and the values David had tried to instill in our son. Maybe, Marcus said quietly, the problem isn't that Dad is trying to control my decisions, maybe the problem is that I've been letting someone else control them for years. He opened the laptop and inserted the drive, his movements deliberate despite the tremor in his hands. Sophia stood behind him, her face a mask of fury and calculation as she watched her carefully constructed influence beginning to crumble. The first video began with David sitting in his study at home, recorded during one of his better days when the cancer treatment hadn't yet stolen his color and energy. He looked directly into the camera with the same honest intensity he'd brought to every important conversation of his life. Hello, son, David's recorded voice filled the small room. If you're watching this, then I'm probably gone, and you're probably angry about the decisions I made regarding my estate. I want you to understand that those decisions came from love, not punishment, though I know they might feel like punishment right now. Marcus settled into the chair, his full attention focused on the screen. Sophia remained standing behind him, her body language radiating tension and barely contained rage. I want to tell you about the day you were born, David continued on the video. I'd been at a construction site when your mother called to say her water had broken. I drove to the hospital still covered in sawdust and concrete mix, and when the nurse handed you to me for the first time, I made a promise. The camera captured David's expression as he remembered that moment, the love and wonder still visible in his eyes, 38 years later. I promised that I would do everything in my power to help you become a man of character, someone who understood that strength comes from lifting others up, not from accumulating wealth or status. I promised to show you that real success is measured by the positive impact you have on other people's lives. Marcus leaned forward slightly, drawn into his father's words despite the emotional difficulty of hearing them. For many years, I thought I was succeeding in that promise. David continued, you worked hard in school, you showed kindness to people regardless of their position or status, you seemed to understand that privilege brings responsibility. I was proud of the young man you were becoming. The video shifted to show photographs of Marcus throughout his childhood and adolescence, images I recognized from our family albums. Marcus at age 8, helping David build a treehouse in our backyard. Marcus at 16, volunteering at a homeless shelter during Christmas break. Marcus at 22, presenting his college graduation project about sustainable construction practices. I kept believing that those values were still there, even as your behavior began to change. David's voice continued over the photographs. I made excuses for the missed family gatherings, the shortened visits, the increasing focus on material acquisitions rather than meaningful relationships. Sophia shifted uncomfortably behind Marcus, clearly unhappy with the direction of David's narrative. But character isn't something you can put on hold, son. It's not a phase you outgrow, or a luxury you can afford to abandon when other priorities emerge. Character is who you are when you think no one is watching, how you treat people when it's inconvenient, whether you honor your commitments when keeping them costs you something. The photographs changed to more recent images, and I recognized some I'd taken during family gatherings over the past few years. Marcus arriving late to birthday celebrations, checking his phone during conversations, standing apart from family groups with an expression of polite endurance, rather than genuine engagement. I watched you become someone I didn't recognize, David said, his voice heavy with sadness. Someone who valued convenience over commitment, status over substance, personal gain over family loyalty. I kept hoping it was temporary, that something would remind you of the man I'd raised you to be. Marcus's face was pale as he absorbed his father's assessment, seeing himself through eyes that had loved him unconditionally, but couldn't ignore his transformation. The decision to restructure my estate wasn't made in anger, son. It was made in hope. Hope that losing the financial inheritance you'd expected might force you to examine the spiritual inheritance you'd already discarded. The video paused, and David's voice spoke directly to the room from the bed behind us. There's more, Marcus. Hours of recordings where I try to explain my reasoning, share memories of who you used to be, and express my hopes for who you could still become. But first, I need to know if you want to hear them. Marcus turned away from the laptop to look at his father, tears streaming down his face. Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize how far I'd drifted from the person you raised me to be. Recognizing it is the first step, David replied gently. But recognition alone isn't enough. The question is what you're willing to do about it. Sophia had remained silent during the video, but now she stepped forward with renewed determination. Marcus, this is exactly what I warned you about. Your father is using emotional manipulation to make you feel guilty for having an independent adult life. You don't owe anyone an apology for making your own choices. Marcus looked at his wife, then back at his father, the conflict evident in his expression. But what if my choices have been wrong, Sophia? What if I've been so focused on what I wanted that I've forgotten about what matters? What matters is our future together, she replied firmly. Our financial security, our social position, our ability to build the life we've planned. You can't let guilt over missing a few family events destroy everything we've worked for. David watched this exchange with the careful attention of someone observing a crucial test of character. The next few minutes would determine whether Marcus had the courage to acknowledge his mistakes and work toward redemption, or whether he would choose the easier path of justifying his behavior and maintaining the status quo. Sophia, Marcus said slowly, when you think about our marriage, about the life we've built together, what are you most proud of? The question seemed to catch her off guard. I'm proud of our success, our beautiful home, our position in the community. I'm proud of how far we've come from where we started. But what about the relationship itself? Marcus pressed, what about the way we treat each other, the values we share, the impact we have on other people's lives? Sophia's hesitation before answering revealed the superficiality of what she considered important. Those things are fine, Marcus, but they don't pay the bills or provide security for the future. David's voice, though weak, carried absolute clarity. Son, listen carefully to how she defines success and security. Notice what she considers valuable and what she considers optional. Marcus turned back to the laptop, his finger hovering over the play button. I want to hear the rest, Dad. I want to understand what I've lost, and what I might be able to find again. Then you're choosing him over me, Sophia said, her voice cold with finality. I won't compete with a dead man for my husband's loyalty. The cruelty of her words hung in the air like poison, revealing the depth of her selfishness and the complete absence of empathy that had driven so many of her decisions throughout their marriage. Marcus stared at his wife, seeing perhaps for the first time the person she really was beneath the beauty and charm that had initially attracted him. Dad isn't dead yet, Sophia. And even when he is gone, the values he taught me, the love he showed me, the example he set, those things don't die with him. He pressed play on the video, and David's voice filled the room again, sharing memories and wisdom while his actual presence grew weaker in the hospital bed. For the next hour, we watched and listened as a father tried to rescue his son's soul from the material ambitions and shallow relationships that had nearly destroyed it. Sophia stood by the window, her body language radiating anger and defeat. She'd invested years in shaping Marcus into someone who would prioritize her wants and needs above all other considerations, and now she was watching that investment collapse under the weight of deeper truths and stronger loves. As the videos continued, Marcus laughed at some memories, cried at others, and gradually seemed to rediscover parts of himself that had been buried under years of compromise and accommodation. He was remembering who he'd been before Sophia's influence had reshaped his priorities and values. "There's one more thing," David said when the final video ended. "A choice I'm offering you, son. A chance to earn back not just my financial inheritance, but my respect and your own self-respect." Marcus looked up from the laptop, his face transformed by the emotional journey he'd just experienced. "What kind of choice, Dad?" David's eyes were growing heavy with exhaustion, but his voice remained steady. "Work for the employee cooperative that will inherit the business. Start at the bottom, learn every job, prove that you understand what it means to serve something larger than yourself. If after 2 years you can demonstrate real leadership, real commitment to the company's values, the employees can vote to make you a partner." The offer was generous and challenging in equal measure, providing Marcus with an opportunity for redemption while requiring him to earn it through sustained effort and character development. "And if I refuse?" Marcus asked quietly. "Then you keep the trust fund that provides a comfortable but modest life, and you build your future through your own efforts rather than inherited wealth," David replied. "Either choice allows you to live with dignity, but only one allows you to reclaim your character." Sophia finally spoke, her voice sharp with desperation. "Marcus, he's asking you to give up everything we've worked for, everything we've planned, our house, our lifestyle, our position in the community. It all depends on that inheritance." Marcus looked at his wife, then at his father, then at the legal documents scattered across the hospital table. The choice before him wasn't really about money, or property, or business ownership. It was about the kind of man he wanted to be, and the kind of life he wanted to live. "What about us?" Sophia pressed. "What about our marriage?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying the woman he'd married and loved, seeing perhaps for the first time how incompatible their values had become. "I don't know, Sophia. I honestly don't know if the person I'm trying to become can be married to someone who measures love by bank account balances." The admission hung between them like a bridge burning, the end of illusions that had sustained their relationship through years of growing incompatibility. David's breathing was becoming more labored, the effort of this emotional confrontation taking its toll on his failing body. But his eyes remained fixed on Marcus, waiting for the decision that would determine not just the distribution of his estate, but the final chapter of his relationship with his son. Marcus stood slowly, the weight of the choice settling on his shoulders like a heavy coat. In the next few minutes, he would have to decide whether to fight for an inheritance he hadn't earned, or work to reclaim a character he'd nearly lost. The decision would define not just his future, but his fundamental identity as a human being. The battle for Marcus's soul had reached its climax, and only he could determine which side would ultimately prevail. Marcus walked to the window, staring out at the Portland skyline that had been the backdrop of his entire life. The city looked the same as always, but something fundamental had shifted in how he saw it. The buildings his father had helped construct, the neighborhoods where Walsh Associates had built affordable housing, the community that had supported their family for decades. All of it represented values and relationships he'd nearly discarded in pursuit of Sophia's vision of success. "I accept your challenge, Dad," he said finally, his voice steady with newfound resolve. "I want to earn back what I've lost, starting with my own respect." David's face transformed with relief and hope, the kind of expression I hadn't seen from him since before his diagnosis. Despite his physical weakness, something powerful and vital flickered in his eyes. "And our marriage?" Sophia's voice cut through the moment like broken glass. "What about everything we've built together, Marcus? The life we planned?" Marcus turned to face his wife, and I saw him struggle with genuine pain. Whatever else had gone wrong between them, he had loved her, and ending that relationship would cost him something real. "I don't know if the person I need to become can stay married to someone who sees love as a business transaction," he said quietly. "Maybe we both deserve partners who share our actual values instead of trying to change each other into different people." Sophia's face cycled through shock, anger and calculation before settling into cold fury. But don't think this ends here. I'll contest that ridiculous will, and I'll make sure everyone knows how your family manipulated you during a vulnerable time. You're welcome to try, David said, his voice barely audible but absolutely clear. James Rodriguez has documented everything thoroughly. 3 psychological evaluations, video recordings of my reasoning, testimony from witnesses who observed Marcus's behavior over the past year. He paused to catch his breath, then continued. More importantly, the employee cooperative structure means there's nothing for you to contest. The business belongs to the people who actually work there, not to family members who see it as a personal asset. The finality of David's legal planning was becoming clear to Sophia, and with it the collapse of all her carefully laid financial strategies. She'd spent years positioning herself for an inheritance that was never going to materialize in the form she'd expected. "This is insane," she said, gathering her purse and moving toward the door. "Marcus, when you realize what you've thrown away for the approval of a dead man, don't expect me to be waiting." "I won't," Marcus replied sadly, "and Dad isn't dead yet." Sophia paused at the threshold, her final words delivered with venom. "He will be soon, and then you'll be alone with your noble poverty and your family loyalty that doesn't pay for anything." After she left, the room felt lighter, despite the gravity of what had just transpired. Marcus returned to his father's bedside, taking David's hand in both of his own. "I'm sorry, Dad, for everything, for the years I wasted, the opportunities I missed, the person I let myself become." David squeezed his son's hand with what little strength remained. "Don't apologize for the past, son, make the future count." Over the next 2 days, as David's condition continued to decline, Marcus never left the hospital. He slept in the uncomfortable chair beside his father's bed, holding vigil with the dedication he should have shown months earlier. We talked quietly during David's sleeping periods, and I watched my son rediscover parts of himself that had been buried under years of compromise and accommodation. Marcus called James Rodriguez to formally accept the terms of David's offer, beginning the legal process that would allow him to work for the employee cooperative. He also initiated divorce proceedings, taking responsibility for the failure of his marriage and ensuring Sophia received fair treatment despite their fundamental incompatibilities. When David passed peacefully on a quiet Thursday morning, Marcus was holding his hand, whispering words of love and gratitude that I know his father heard even if he couldn't respond. The grief that followed was profound but clean, unmarked by regret, over things left unsaid or opportunities missed for connection. The funeral was everything David would have wanted. Hundreds of employees, clients, and community members gathered to celebrate a life well lived, and a legacy that would continue through the cooperative he'd established. Marcus delivered a eulogy that acknowledged his own failures while committing to honor his father's memory through changed behavior rather than empty promises. 6 months later, I found myself standing in the employee break room at Walsh Associates, watching Marcus share lunch with the construction crew who'd just finished a low-income housing project. He wore work clothes instead of expensive suits, his hands bore the calluses of actual labor, and his conversation focused on the details of their work rather than financial projections or profit margins. "How's he doing?" asked Maria Gonzalez, the accounting manager Sophia had once wanted to replace with cheaper labor. "He's learning," I replied, noting how Marcus listened carefully to the older workers' advice about construction techniques and client relations. "He's becoming the man his father always believed he could be." The transformation hadn't been easy. Marcus started at minimum wage, working under the supervision of people who'd once reported to him. He learned to operate machinery, read blueprints from a worker's perspective, and understand the physical demands of construction work. More importantly, he learned to value the knowledge and experience of employees who'd spent decades mastering their crafts. There were difficult moments when his pride chafed against taking direction from former subordinates, when the financial pressures of his dramatically reduced income created stress, when well-meaning friends suggested he was wasting his education and potential. But Marcus persevered, driven by a deeper understanding of what constituted real success. The employee ownership model David had established worked exactly as he'd envisioned. Decisions were made collaboratively, profits were shared equitably, and the company's commitment to quality and community service remained unwavering. Without the pressure to maximize returns for external shareholders, Walsh Associates could focus on building well and treating people fairly. Marcus's relationship with his co-workers evolved gradually from suspicion to acceptance to genuine respect. They'd initially questioned whether his commitment was real or just a performance designed to eventually regain control. But as months passed and his dedication never wavered, they began to see him as a teammate rather than a displaced boss. 1 year after David's death, the cooperative held its first annual meeting to review performance and make strategic decisions. Marcus had requested the opportunity to address the group, not as a candidate for leadership but as someone seeking to acknowledge how much he'd learned from working alongside them. "When I first started here," he told the assembled employees, "I thought I understood this business because I'd grown up around it. I knew the financial side, the client relationships, the administrative processes. But I didn't understand the most important part, which is the people who actually do the work." He spoke about lessons learned from experienced carpenters, insights gained from working with electricians and plumbers, appreciation developed for the coordination required to complete complex projects safely and efficiently. "My father structured this cooperative because he understood something I'd forgotten," Marcus continued. "A business is only as strong as the people who believe in its mission. You can't build lasting success on financial engineering or management theories. You build it on relationships, trust, and shared commitment to doing good work." The applause that followed was warm and genuine, reflecting Marcus's earned place within the organization rather than inherited privilege. After the meeting, several senior employees approached me to express their satisfaction with Marcus's development. Jerry Santos, the master carpenter who'd taught Marcus to read blueprints as a child, was particularly enthusiastic. "He's become someone his father would be proud of," Jerry said, and I felt David's presence strongly in that moment, as if his spirit was witnessing the redemption he'd made possible through careful planning and unconditional love. 2 years after beginning his journey back to character, Marcus was invited by the cooperative to join their leadership team. The vote was unanimous, reflecting genuine confidence in his transformation rather than obligation to David's memory. He accepted the position with humility, understanding that leadership was a responsibility to serve others rather than an opportunity to exercise power. On the anniversary of David's death, Marcus and I visited his grave together, bringing flowers and sharing memories of the year that had passed. Marcus looked healthier than he had during his marriage to Sophia, the stress lines around his eyes replaced by the contentment that comes from meaningful work and authentic relationships. "I think about him every day," Marcus said, kneeling to place white roses against David's headstone. "Not just missing him, but wondering what he would think about the choices I'm making, whether he'd be proud of the progress I've achieved." "He would be," I assured him, meaning it completely. "He always believed you had this capacity for growth and character. He just had to create circumstances that would help you find it again." As we walked back toward our cars, Marcus paused to look back at the cemetery where his father rested. "Mom, do you think he knew how this would turn out? Do you think he planned for everything that happened?" I considered the question carefully, thinking about David's meticulous preparation, his deep understanding of human nature, and his unwavering faith in the power of love to inspire positive change. "I think he hoped," I said finally. "He hoped that losing the inheritance you expected would force you to examine the inheritance that really mattered. He hoped that facing genuine consequences would inspire genuine growth. He hoped that somewhere inside the man you'd become, the boy he'd raised was still there waiting to emerge." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "And what about you? Are you proud of the choices I've made?" The question touched me deeply, reflecting the humility and concern for others that had replaced his former entitlement and self-focus. "I'm proud of your courage," I told him. "It takes real strength to admit mistakes, to start over, to rebuild relationships you've damaged. You've honored your father's memory not through inheriting his wealth, but through reclaiming his values." 6 months later, Marcus surprised me with news that he was dating someone new. Sarah Chen was a social worker who shared his commitment to community service and understood the value of work that prioritized meaning over money. Their relationship was built on shared values rather than financial compatibility, and I could see in Marcus's face the peace that comes from loving someone who supports your best self rather than demanding you compromise it. When they married in a simple ceremony focused on family and close friends rather than social display, I felt David's presence strongly throughout the celebration. Marcus had found not just professional redemption but personal happiness with someone who valued character over status, contribution over consumption. 5 years after David's death, Walsh Associates had grown into one of Portland's most respected construction companies, known for fair wages, environmental responsibility, and commitment to affordable housing. The cooperative model had proven both profitable and principled, demonstrating that business success didn't require sacrificing human values. Marcus had become a leader who earned respect through competence and integrity rather than inherited authority. His marriage to Sarah was strong and supportive, built on the foundation of mutual respect and shared purpose. He'd found the life David had always hoped he would choose, though it had taken the shock of potential loss to inspire him to pursue it. On quiet evenings when I missed David most intensely, I would think about the wisdom of his final decision. He'd loved Marcus enough to risk their relationship in order to save our son's character. He'd understood that true inheritance wasn't about financial assets but about values, principles, and the courage to live meaningfully. The divorce papers Marcus had brought to David's deathbed were meant to facilitate the dismantling of our family's legacy for short-term financial gain. But David had brought something more powerful, a carefully planned opportunity for redemption that honored both justice and love. In the end, Marcus inherited something far more valuable than money or property. He inherited the satisfaction of work well done, relationships built on authentic connection, and the peace that comes from aligning your choices with your deepest values. David's true legacy wasn't the business he'd built, or the wealth he'd accumulated. It was the transformation of a son who'd lost his way, but found the courage to choose character over convenience, meaning over money, love over status. As I watched Marcus teaching his young stepson to build a birdhouse in our backyard, using the same patient instruction David had once shown him, I knew that the most important inheritance had been successfully passed to the next generation. The cycle of love, wisdom, and character would continue, ensuring that David's true legacy would endure long after bank accounts were closed and property deeds were filed away. The battle for Marcus's soul had been won not through ultimatums or manipulation, but through the power of unconditional love combined with real consequences. David had given our son the greatest gift possible, the opportunity to become the man he was always meant to be. The weeks following David's funeral brought unexpected challenges that tested the strength of the decisions Marcus had made in that hospital room. Sophia's threats about contesting the will materialized into aggressive legal action, spearheaded by an attorney who specialized in family disputes and had a reputation for ruthless tactics. The first indication of trouble came when James Rodriguez called me on a rainy Tuesday morning, his usually calm voice tight with concern. "Catherine, we need to meet immediately. Sophia has filed multiple motions challenging David's mental competency, alleging undue influence, and claiming that the employee cooperative structure violates Oregon corporate law." I drove to James's downtown office through sheets of rain that seemed to mirror the storm gathering around our family's future. The legal documents spread across his conference table painted a picture of coordinated assault, designed to overwhelm us with complexity and expense. "She's hired Morrison, Blake and Associates," James explained, referring to one of Portland's most expensive litigation firms. "They're known for taking cases on contingency when they smell significant assets, and they've clearly convinced themselves that David's estate represents a worthy target." The allegations were as predictable as they were painful to read. Sophia claimed that David's cancer medication had impaired his judgment, that I had isolated him from family members who might have provided different counsel, and that the employee cooperative was an elaborate scheme to defraud Marcus of his rightful inheritance. "What's our position?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the anxiety building in my chest. James opened another folder, this one considerably thicker. David anticipated this exact scenario. "We have comprehensive documentation of his mental competency throughout the estate planning process, including independent psychological evaluations conducted specifically to prevent these kinds of challenges." He spread out medical records, legal memoranda, and video recordings that painted a clear picture of David's careful preparation for the possibility that his final wishes might be contested. More importantly, James continued, the employee cooperative structure was established as a separate legal entity before David's death. The business was technically transferred to the cooperative, while he was still alive and actively participating in operations. Sophia isn't challenging an inheritance, she's challenging a legitimate business restructuring. Despite James's confidence in our legal position, the emotional toll of the litigation began to affect everyone involved. Marcus found himself named as a defendant in his estranged wife's lawsuit, forced to defend his father's final decisions while simultaneously trying to prove himself worthy of the redemption opportunity David had created. The stress showed in Marcus's face during our weekly dinners, a tradition we'd established to maintain family connection during this difficult period. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his hands shook slightly when he thought no one was watching. "She's trying to destroy everything Dad worked for," he said one evening, pushing food around his plate without eating. "The employees are worried about their jobs, clients are asking questions about the company's stability, and every day brings new legal papers that cost us thousands of dollars to respond to." I reached across the table to cover his hand with mine. "Your father knew this might happen, Marcus. He prepared for it because he believed the values he'd built into the company were worth defending. But what if I'm not strong enough to defend them?" The vulnerability in his voice reminded me of the little boy who used to seek comfort after nightmares. What if Sophia wins and everything Dad sacrificed for gets handed over to people who see it as nothing more than a financial asset? Before I could respond, Marcus's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The name on the screen made his face go pale. "It's Jerry Santos." Jerry had been calling Marcus regularly with updates from the job sites, but something in Marcus's expression suggested this call carried different news. "What is it, Jerry?" Marcus answered, putting the phone on speaker so I could hear. "Marcus, I'm sorry to bother you at home, but we've got a problem. 3 of our biggest clients called today asking about the ownership situation. Somebody's been calling them, suggesting that the company might not be stable enough to complete their projects." My heart sank as I realized the implications. Sophia wasn't just challenging David's will in court, she was actively trying to undermine the business that supported dozens of families. "Do we know who's been making these calls?" Marcus asked, the Morrison law firm's investigator. "They're telling clients that the ownership structure is tied up in litigation and that they might want to consider alternative contractors for any new projects." Marcus closed his eyes, absorbing this latest blow. "Jerry, I need you to call an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. All department heads, all project managers. We need to address this directly before rumors start affecting our current contracts." After ending the call, Marcus sat in silence for several minutes. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a determination I hadn't heard since before his marriage to Sophia. "I won't let her destroy what Dad built. Whatever it takes, however long this litigation drags on, I won't let her win." The emergency meeting the next morning took place in the conference room at Walsh Associates, a space that had witnessed countless planning sessions and strategy discussions over the years. 23 employees gathered around the large oak table that David had commissioned from a local craftsman, their faces reflecting concern and uncertainty about their collective future. Marcus stood at the head of the table, looking more like his father than I'd seen since David's death. Despite the stress of recent weeks, he projected the calm authority that comes from commitment to something larger than personal interest. "I wanted to address the rumors and concerns that are circulating about the company's stability," he began. "Some of you have heard that our ownership structure is being challenged in court. Some of you may be worried about your jobs, your benefits, your futures with this organization." The room was completely silent, everyone focused on Marcus's words with the intensity that comes from genuine concern about matters that affect their livelihoods. "I want to be completely transparent about our situation," Marcus continued. "My estranged wife is challenging my father's decision to restructure this company as an employee cooperative. She believes the business should be treated as a personal asset rather than a community of workers committed to shared values. He paused, making eye contact with individuals around the table, people who'd known him since childhood and had watched his recent transformation with cautious optimism. She's hired expensive attorneys to argue that Dad wasn't competent to make these decisions, that he was manipulated into creating an ownership structure that benefits employees rather than family members. She's also trying to damage our reputation with clients, hoping to weaken the business so that it becomes easier to acquire through legal action. Maria Gonzalez, the accounting manager, raised her hand. Marcus, what does this mean for our contracts? Our payroll, our health insurance? Nothing changes in our day-to-day operations. Marcus replied firmly, the cooperative is a legally established entity that exists independently of the inheritance dispute. Our contracts remain valid, our payroll continues as scheduled, and all benefits remain in place. Tom Bradley, the senior project manager, leaned forward. But what about the long term? If she wins this lawsuit, what happens to us? Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering how much detail to share about the complex legal strategies at play. The honest answer is that we're facing a coordinated attempt to undermine everything Dad worked to create. But we're not facing it passively. He gestured toward James Rodriguez, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner taking notes. James has prepared a comprehensive defense based on extensive documentation of Dad's mental competency and careful legal planning. We have video recordings of Dad explaining his reasoning, medical evaluations confirming his cognitive ability, and detailed records of the business restructuring process. More importantly, Marcus continued, we have something Sophia and her attorneys don't understand. We have a shared commitment to values that can't be purchased or litigated. We have relationships built on trust and mutual respect. We have a track record of excellent work that speaks for itself. Jerry Santos, the master carpenter who'd become something of an unofficial spokesman for the older employees, stood up slowly. Marcus, I've been with this company for 28 years. I watched your father build it from nothing, and I watched you grow up learning its values. What do you need from us? The question opened floodgates of support that surprised everyone in the room. Employee after employee stood to offer assistance, whether in the form of testimony about David's mental state, documentation of Marcus's recent growth and commitment, or simply moral support during a difficult period. Sarah Chen, whom Marcus had started dating several months earlier, attended the meeting as the social worker consulted by the company for employee assistance programs. Her presence represented the new relationships Marcus was building based on shared values rather than social status. I've worked with this company for 2 years now, Sarah said when Marcus invited her to speak. I've seen how decisions are made here, how conflicts are resolved, how success is measured. This is an organization that prioritizes human welfare over profit margins, that treats employees as partners rather than resources. She paused, looking around the room at faces that reflected genuine care for each other and commitment to common purpose. That culture doesn't happen by accident. It's the result of deliberate choices about values and priorities. Those choices are now being tested, but they're also being validated by how this community is responding to external pressure. As the meeting concluded, employees began organizing voluntary efforts to support the company during the litigation period. Some offered to speak with clients about the stability and quality of Walsh Associates. Others volunteered to document their experiences with David during his final months, providing testimony about his mental clarity and decision-making ability. The most significant offer came from an unexpected source. Miguel Vasquez, a newer employee who'd been hired just 6 months before David's death, approached Marcus after most others had left. I know I haven't been here long, Miguel said hesitantly, but I want you to know why I chose to work for this company instead of the other offers I had. Marcus listened as Miguel described his previous job with a large construction firm that treated workers as disposable assets, where safety shortcuts were routine and employee concerns were ignored by management focused solely on profit margins. When I interviewed here, your father spent 2 hours explaining the company's safety protocols, its commitment to quality workmanship, and its philosophy about treating employees as family members. He didn't just offer me a job, he invited me to join something meaningful. Miguel's voice grew stronger as he continued. I took a pay cut to work here because I believed in what he was building. That belief hasn't changed because someone who never understood the company's values is trying to destroy it. Over the following weeks, similar conversations occurred throughout the organization. Employees who'd initially been uncertain about the cooperative structure began to understand that they were being asked to defend not just their jobs, but a way of working that prioritized human dignity and community values. The legal battle intensified as Sophia's attorneys filed increasingly aggressive motions designed to create maximum disruption and expense. They demanded depositions from every employee who'd interacted with David during his final year, subpoenaed medical records from multiple healthcare providers, and hired private investigators to search for evidence of cognitive impairment or undue influence. Marcus bore the brunt of these attacks, spending countless hours in attorney conferences and deposition sessions where hostile lawyers tried to paint him as a manipulative son who'd exploited his father's illness for personal gain. The irony wasn't lost on any of us that Marcus was being accused of exactly the behavior he'd actually rejected when he chose character over convenience in that hospital room. James Rodriguez proved to be a formidable advocate, methodically dismantling each of Sophia's allegations with documentary evidence and expert testimony. Medical professionals confirmed David's mental competency throughout his illness. Business associates testified to his careful planning and clear reasoning about company succession. Video recordings showed a man making difficult but thoughtful decisions about protecting his life's work. The turning point came during Marcus's own deposition, when Sophia's lead attorney made the mistake of asking him to describe his relationship with his father during David's final months. "My father was disappointed in me," Marcus said clearly, his voice carrying the weight of hard-won self-awareness. "He'd watched me become someone he didn't recognize, someone who prioritized material success over family relationships and community responsibility." The attorney pressed him about the timing of David's estate changes, trying to establish a connection between Marcus's presence at the hospital and his father's decision to restructure the business. "The estate changes were made before my father's final hospitalization," Marcus replied. He'd been planning the cooperative structure for months, working with James Rodriguez to ensure legal compliance and operational viability. "But you were present when he explained his reasoning," the attorney continued. "Isn't it true that you influenced his decision by expressing concerns about your wife's financial expectations?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering how to answer truthfully without providing ammunition for Sophia's case. "My father didn't need my input to understand my wife's character and motivations. He'd observed her behavior for years and reached his own conclusions about whether she shared the values he wanted to preserve." The attorney shifted tactics, trying to portray Marcus as a vindictive son who'd turned his father against his daughter-in-law. "Isn't it true that you resented your wife's success and social connections?" "I resented her influence on my own character," Marcus replied simply. "She taught me to value status over substance, convenience over commitment, personal gain over family loyalty. My father's final gift was helping me recognize how far I'd drifted from the man he'd raised me to be." As the deposition continued, it became clear that Marcus's honesty about his own failures was more powerful than any defensive strategy could have been. He acknowledged his mistakes without making excuses, accepted responsibility for damaging his relationship with David, and expressed genuine gratitude for the opportunity to earn back his father's respect through changed behavior. The legal proceedings stretched through the summer and into early fall, creating ongoing stress, but also strengthening the bonds among Walsh Associates employees. They'd been forced to articulate and defend their shared values, clarifying for themselves and others what made their workplace different from typical corporate environments. Client relationships, initially threatened by Sophia's campaign of doubt and uncertainty, actually grew stronger as contractors and property developers saw the company's commitment to quality and integrity under pressure. Several longtime clients made a point of praising Walsh Associates publicly, praising their professionalism and reliability during a difficult period. The breakthrough came in September when James Rodriguez uncovered evidence that Sophia's legal team had been engaging in questionable tactics designed to intimidate witnesses and discourage employee cooperation. Private investigators had been following some workers home, creating photographs that implied surveillance, and making phone calls to family members that bordered on harassment. Judge Patricia Morrison, who was overseeing the case, expressed strong disapproval of these tactics during a hearing that effectively marked the beginning of the end for Sophia's legal challenge. This court will not tolerate attempts to intimidate witnesses or interfere with the legitimate business operations of the defendant organization, Judge Morrison stated firmly. The evidence presented suggests a pattern of harassment that raises serious questions about the plaintiff's good faith in pursuing this litigation. James immediately filed counter-motions seeking sanctions against Sophia's legal team and reimbursement for the expenses their tactics had created. More importantly, the judge's criticism signaled that the court was losing patience with arguments that had failed to produce credible evidence of cognitive impairment or undue influence. The final hearing took place on a crisp October morning exactly 1 year after David's initial cancer diagnosis. The courtroom was packed with Walsh Associates employees who'd requested time off to show support for the cooperative and the values it represented. Sophia attended with a significantly reduced legal team, the expensive Morrison firm, having apparently concluded that continued investment in her case was unlikely to produce profitable results. She looked older than her years, the stress of failed litigation and financial uncertainty having taken their toll on her previously polished appearance. Judge Morrison's ruling was comprehensive and unambiguous. David's mental competency was fully supported by medical evidence and witness testimony. The employee cooperative structure was legally sound and properly implemented. Marcus's role in his father's final decisions was that of a son seeking redemption rather than a manipulator seeking personal gain. The evidence demonstrates that Richard David Walsh was a meticulous businessman who spent considerable time and effort ensuring that his final wishes would be properly implemented. Judge Morrison concluded. His decision to restructure his business as an employee cooperative reflects values and priorities that were consistent throughout his life and career. The judge also imposed significant financial sanctions on Sophia's legal team for their harassment tactics, essentially ensuring that her pursuit of David's assets would leave her worse off financially than if she'd never filed the lawsuit. As we left the courthouse that afternoon, Marcus walked beside me with a lightness in his step that I hadn't seen since before his marriage. The legal victory was satisfying, but more important was the validation of David's faith in the power of character and community to withstand external pressures. "Dad would be proud," Marcus said as we stood on the courthouse steps, looking out at the city where David had built his legacy. Not just of winning the case, but of how everyone came together to defend what he'd created. The months that followed brought remarkable growth for both Marcus personally and Walsh Associates as an organization. The employee cooperative model proved not just legally defensible but operationally superior, fostering innovation and commitment that surprised even James Rodriguez, who'd initially been skeptical about its practical viability. Marcus's leadership role within the cooperative evolved naturally, as his co-workers recognized his genuine transformation and growing competence. The entitled young man who'd once expected inherited authority had become someone who earned respect through service and demonstrated commitment to shared values. His relationship with Sarah deepened as they discovered compatibility based on similar priorities and mutual support for each other's professional missions. Their engagement, announced during the company's annual Christmas party, reflected the kind of partnership built on character rather than convenience. On the second anniversary of David's death, Marcus and I returned to his gravesite with flowers and news of the life that had grown from the seeds of his careful planning. The employee cooperative had expanded to include 2 new construction crews, a renovation division, and an apprenticeship program that provided training opportunities for young people interested in skilled trades. "He knew exactly what he was doing," Marcus said, kneeling to place white roses against David's headstone. "Every decision, every document, every conversation was designed to protect what really mattered while giving me a chance to prove I could change." As we stood in the quiet cemetery, I reflected on the wisdom of David's final strategy. He'd loved Marcus enough to risk their relationship in order to save our son's character. He'd understood that true inheritance wasn't about financial assets, but about values, purpose, and the satisfaction that comes from meaningful work and authentic relationships. The divorce papers Marcus had brought to David's deathbed were meant to facilitate the dismantling of our family's legacy for short-term financial gain. But David had prepared something far more powerful, a carefully orchestrated opportunity for redemption that honored both justice and mercy. In the end, Marcus inherited something far more valuable than money or property. He inherited the knowledge that character can be reclaimed, that relationships can be rebuilt, and that the most important legacy anyone can leave is the example of a life lived with integrity and purpose. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.